Welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren. And each week at this time, Plugged In dives into U.S. policy, questioning those who make and shape policy. And you're also going to hear various opinions about that policy. And by being plugged in, you will have the chance to speak up and get involved. We are live on Facebook at Voice of America, and we want your comments and questions. And today we dive into what the United States is calling ethnic cleansing of the Rohingya people in Myanmar. We're going to talk to Reverend Franklin Graham, president of the charity Samaritan's Purse, which has mobilized to help thousands and thousands of refugees who have fled to Bangladesh. And we're also going to examine the arrest and jailing of 2 Reuters journalists in Myanmar. They were arrested while investigating a massacre of Rohingyas in Myanmar. Reuters executive editor Chua joins us later. First, we begin with Myanmar, also known as Burma, oppression of the mostly Muslim Rohingya that has been going on for decades. The latest violence was sparked in August 2017 when Rohingya militants attacked police posts, killing 12 officers in Rakhine State, where most Rohingya live. The response to that attack was overwhelming. Burmese troops and local Buddhist mobs began burning villages, attacking, torturing, and killing Rohingya civilians. More than 650,000 Rohingya fleeing to neighboring Bangladesh. In late December, VOA reporter Steve Sanford went to the teeming refugee camps in Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh.
Here in Bangladesh, thousands of female refugees might appear to be coping with conditions in the camps. But for many survivors of sexual violence by Myanmar security forces, the depression and post-traumatic stress disorder have lasting effects. Rohingya grandmother Regina feels an emptiness since she lost contact with her granddaughter after soldiers attacked the teen's village earlier this year.
I heard that the military came and entered the house and grabbed her and stole her property, but I didn't see it, I was told. They checked the house and grabbed whatever they wanted. If they found any young women, they took them away. Lots of women were raped.
Access to therapy and treatment is lacking as more pressing issues like food and shelter take precedent. The lack of communications add to the dilemma, as efforts to get the word out to women in need is difficult.
Many also lost their husbands, so you have many female-headed households, women who are still needing support to figure out how services work and how to access them. They don't have experience necessarily advocating for their need for services, so they're going without. So that puts them in an especially vulnerable position.
A recent camp survey from rights group Médecins Sans Frontières reports at least 6,700 Rohingya were killed during the attacks in Myanmar, and satellite imagery shows 40 more villages with building destruction in November, bringing the total to 354. As the evidence mounts, the consensus among most experienced crisis workers is not a surprise.
Having gone through all these traumatic situations, seeing their brothers and sisters and fathers and mothers killed in front of them and being raped, it is not appropriate according to the communities to return immediately.
As of December, the total number of refugees in the camps stands at nearly 860,000, including those who came before the most recent crackdown. And refugees like Muhammad Omar don't show any signs of packing for home.
We won't go back to Myanmar easily unless we get our rights. If we go there, they will cut us, kill us, shoot us, so we won't go back yet.
Dirty water and squalid conditions are prime breeding grounds for outbreaks of preventable diseases. While 900 doses of oral cholera vaccine have been distributed in the camps, another contagious bacterial infection has emerged.
Diphtheria is a vaccine-preventable disease. It's an illustration of how the Rohingya population that are currently living in the makeshift settlements here had very little access to health care from their place of origin in Myanmar.
Myanmar's health sector is rated among the worst in the world, particularly in the ethnic regions, where conflict and poverty limit medical treatment. Now, potential diphtheria carriers must get antitoxins and antibiotics to prevent further spread of the bacterium in the body and kill it. Steve Sanford reporting from Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh.
Now, the situation at these Rohingya refugee camps is dire. At least a dozen charitable and non-governmental organizations are on the ground in Bangladesh desperately trying to help the close to 700,000 refugees. And among those organizations, Samaritan's Purse. Reverend Franklin Graham is its president and CEO, and he joins us. In full disclosure, I do volunteer work with Samaritan's Purse and actually went with them on their cargo plane to the Bangladesh refugee camps in December. Nice to see you, Reverend.
Thank you, Greta.
Reverend, you just got back from the area yourself. First of all, just sort of set the stage. About how many camps are there in the area?
Greta, we went to 5 different camps. There are more. I think they're smaller. We were one that has the estimate. It's on 25,000 acres, around 600,000 just on that one camp. It's incredible. The people are living on top of each other. This was dry season, so the dust was incredible. But rainy season is coming in just a few weeks. The wells are shallow. Right beside the wells are latrines. The latrines are shallow. And when the rains come, those latrines are going to overflow and it's going to go right into the water systems. They say right now about 60% of all the water in the camp is already contaminated. And I just cannot imagine what's going to happen in the next few weeks when the rains come.
And that's April, is when the monsoon season starts?
And it's going to turn into a mud hole. There's no gravel on the roads. And I don't know, matter of fact, most of the camp will be impassable.
Yeah, I noticed that in the camp that I was in, it was all dust, and at this point, is that it's sort of hilly a little bit. So I imagine that none of these structures where people are trying to live, I don't know if you want to call them structures, but they're just going to fold on each other with the rain.
You're going to see a lot of people are going to die, Greta, not so much from the structures collapsing, but it's going to be the disease that's going to come out of this contaminated water. And
of course, the contaminated water leads to cholera, which Samaritan's Purse has done a lot of work with that in Haiti. But you're also there doing the diphtheria outbreak. How extensive is that now?
It's much less right now, Greta. The UN has done a very good job in vaccinating the people. We've seen over 1,000 cases. Diphtheria is something that hasn't been seen in this country since probably the late 40s, maybe early 50s. It's been eradicated in the United States, and we all have had inoculations for it. But it's something our doctors haven't seen, and what it is, Greta, it causes the swelling of your airway, and your esophagus gets so swollen, it just shuts the air off, and you just suffocate. And you see this a lot in the children, and that's the ones we've treated the most of the children.
We're looking at a picture. That's a picture I took on my trip. Now, I don't know what happened to that young boy, but we were guessing or surmising that it was a machete. It was, because that's been, so many of these people have fled with the Myanmar military and even some Buddhist civilians chasing them with machetes.
Yes. We saw a number of cases that come into the diphtheria for treatment. And these were parents bringing their children in, and these parents, many of them have wounds that they've received. And almost every person that I talked to, Greta, you asked them, how many of you have lost a family member? Everybody raised their hands. And I was talking to maybe a group of about 70 to 100 people, and everybody just raised their hands that they had lost a family member. And then they started telling me, it was my aunt, my mother, my wife, my child. They estimate close to 600, I think about 6,700 people. These are statistics from MSF. That's Medicine Sans Frontières. About 6,700 people died since August fleeing Myanmar. About 700 of those were children that were shot, hacked to death, and just dumped in the river. It's really sad what you see, and you talk to the people in the camps. Everybody has lost someone that they love.
I heard one story where babies were taken out of mothers and thrown into fires, young children just thrown into fires by the military.
Yes, and Greta, it breaks your heart now. I'm a Christian, and Samaritan's Purse is a Christian organization, and these are Muslims. Some people may say, well, why would Christians be helping Muslims? Because God loves all of us. He made us and created us. Samaritan's Purse, we help Muslims, we'll help Buddhists, we'll help Hindus, whatever the case may be. But as a Christian, I want to show God's love to these people. And by loving them and by helping them, we had one man in our diphtheria tent, we were helping him. He asked us, he said, "Are you Christians?" We said, "Yes." He said, "I would be honored to be treated by a Christian." And he was a Muslim man.
How long long can Samaritan's Purse and Doctors Without Borders and these other organizations stay there? I mean, this is, if you have 600,000 to 700,000 people in the camp, and Bangladesh is not letting them out of these camps, they're penned like animals, at least the camp I was in.
They are.
How long, because, and this is not going to get better, the rains are coming, the water's filthy. How long can everybody stay?
I don't know. Right now, Samaritan's Purse does not have any government funding or outside funding other than our regular donors. And that will end at some point, but we're not there yet, Greta.
Well, and there's nobody really in charge of these camps. I mean, there's no. I mean,
well, the Bangladesh government controls really the kind of the perimeter.
But inside the camps,
there are various UN agencies that are responsible for the camps. About two, IOM, International Organization for Migration. They are responsible part of it. And then the UNHCR's the other side of it.
Is this a camp? I mean, you've been to refugee camps all over. In fact, I've been to Sudan in a refugee camp with you. Is this one particularly more dire? Because I mean, I don't see a future for these people unless they go back.
Well, first of all, it's going to be hard to go back because these are stateless people. They don't have identification. They don't have passports or driver's licenses. So when it comes to repatriating them, I don't see the Burmese government allowing them, or the Myanmar government allowing them to come in because they don't have identification. They'll say, they would say, well, you're really from Bangladesh. You know, how do we know you're from here? 288 villages so far have been burned to the ground. So if people go back, what do they go back to? Their homes, their villages, their livelihood, their boats, their cars, their motorcycles, all of that's been destroyed.
And these people were taking care of themselves. They were self-sufficient. Now they're in a penned-in area where they can't farm. They have to wait for handouts.
But you have to wait for handouts. And unfortunately, Greta, the refugee business, that's what it is for the world. It's a big business. And the UN and others profit in a big way over the crises of refugees. And we see the Palestinians are still in their camps after 50, 60 years. I don't see this changing. I'm afraid these people will be here 50 years from now.
And suffering. Their kids don't get school, don't get education. There's limited food. Health care is limited, and the monsoons are coming, and diphtheria and cholera and everything else. It's very bleak. Reverend, thank you. Nice to see you, sir.
Thank you, Greta.
Freedom of the press is under attack in Myanmar. Two Reuters journalists, Lwin and Chua were investigating a massacre when they were arrested in December. They were charged with violating Myanmar's Official Secrets Act. The two journalists are still jailed, and a trial is underway. And last week, Reuters published the investigation the two jailed journalists were working on. First, a warning. The images you are about to see are graphic and gruesome. You may want to turn your head or even close your eyes, but it is important to hear their story. 10 Rohingya men, bound together, watched as their Buddhist neighbors dug a shallow grave. On the morning of September 2nd, all 10 men lay dead in the grave, and a couple of the grave diggers said Buddhist villagers hacked 2 of the Rohingya men to death. The others were shot by Myanmar troops. Some of the Rohingya were still making noises as they were being buried. Joining us from our New York bureau, Chua, Reuters executive editor. Nice to see you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Before I get into the story of the massacre that Reuters broke, and I must admit that every news organization is tipping their hat to Reuters for this work, tell me do you have any information on how your journalists are doing in jail?
Well, we're seeing them somewhat regularly. There's a hearing about once a week, once every other week, and we get to see them for a short time. When the hearings go long, they get a chance to have lunch with their families, which is really great for them. So far, they seem to be holding up well. We just saw them, in fact, today because they had a hearing today. They're very pleased with the fact that we managed to get the story out, so they're very happy about that. And of course, they did have a bit of time with their families, which is also good. Nobody wants to be in jail, but at least for the moment, they seem to be, in good spirits.
All right. What is the massacre they were reporting?
So this was the killing of 10 Rohingya men in the village of Indin. That happened in September. What's really interesting about this story is that, while there have been a lot of reports of atrocities and massacres and so on, most of it has come from the victims' families in Bangladesh. What's interesting here is that we managed to, report on the ground. We have testimony from some of the military people who were involved. We have testimony from Rakhine Buddhist villagers who were involved. And then, of course, we confirmed a lot of the facts with the survivors and family members in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. So we've sort of managed to be able to pull together a real on-the-ground story of what happened to these 10 people. The fact that they were rounded up, they were picked out of a group of people on a beach, tied up, and then just killed the next day.
All right. The two journalists, the Reuters journalists who are in custody, they were reporting on these stories, but the Myanmar government or military says that they had violated, that they'd gotten some secret government documents they shouldn't have. Do you think that they're in jail for reporting on this story or because they violated some law?
Well, look, we're very clear that the reason they were arrested was because of the story they're working on. The Official Secrets Act in Myanmar is a very broad colonial-era law that pretty much allows the government to determine that anything is a secret, and then you're guilty, right? What happened in this case was that they were invited to a meal with some policemen. They showed up. They were given some documents, told not to look at it. When they walked out of the restaurant, they were arrested immediately. So, I mean, you tell me what happened there. The whole case now is going through this process where they're trying to determine, this is a situation where the prosecution has to ask a judge whether they can use the Official Secrets Act or charge them with this crime.
Now, the journalists, all the activities happening in Rakhine State, has it been I know a lot of journalists have tried to get in there in the past, and even Senator Dick Durbin from the United States tried to get in there. Are the journalists getting access to the areas where these stories are starting?
No, I mean, the government has pretty much blocked off most of Rakhine State except for a couple of, highly shepherded press trips to go up there. So no, it's very hard to get into the area, and it's very hard to do reporting on the ground.
Sir, thank you very much for joining us. And again, an incredible story by Reuters. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The massacre and the now jailed Reuters reporters were the topic of discussion at the United Nations Security Council meeting recently. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, called for access for aid organizations and for the reporters' release.
Powerful forces in the Burmese government have denied the ethnic cleansing in Rakhine State. To make sure no one contradicts their preposterous denials, they are preventing access to Rakhine to anyone or any organization that might bear witness to their atrocities, including the UN Security Council. And the result is that they are denying access to many organizations that the displaced and starving in Burma desperately need today. The world is watching and waiting for Burma to act. What we have seen so far is cruel and barbaric. To top it off, they have the gall to blame the media. Unhindered media access is vitally important. Journalists like the two imprisoned Reuters reporters are an indispensable source of information. I also call on the Secretary General to quickly appoint a special envoy for Burma. And I call on the Burmese government to allow a UN fact-finding mission and the special rapporteur into the country. Without the media and UN personnel in Burma to shed light on the crimes being committed, there is no hope for justice for the victims.
Ambassador Haley also called on the Security Council to pressure Aung San Suu Kyi to acknowledge these horrific acts that are taking place in her country. No more excuses, said Haley. Now, I caught up with former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Governor Bill Richardson, who tried to do that just recently.
I think she already was upset with me because there'd been a press report that I had asked for a meeting with the Home Minister about the two Reuters reporters. So I walked in the room, shook her hand, and you could tell by her expression she didn't exactly want to see me. It was a very quick handshake. And then when we sat down and started the dialogue, I could tell that she was uncomfortable. I first raised the issue of the mass graves of some of the Rakhine, that there should be an investigation. I then talked about the importance of dealing fairly with the two Reuters reporters. And I thought pretty much that it was not going well. And she literally exploded, interrupting me, telling me that this is not your charter, Bill. This is out of the question. Stay out of those issues. And then right then I knew that my staying on this commission, we were there for some investigative work and reform work, that it wasn't going to work. So it didn't start too well, and that initial encounter also went into a dinner right after where we were kind of trading, not insults, but very negative. I just made a point. Look, I said, we're friends for 30 years. I've always supported you. And here we are in a situation where you don't want frank advice. Friends give frank advice. And she said, well, I don't want bad advice.
But what can the United States and other nations do to hold the Myanmar military and Aung San Suu Kyi to account? Well, I'll ask my panelist. Jonah Blank is a senior political scientist at RAND Corporation, former policy director for South and Southeast Asia for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And I'm also joined by Htun Lwin, who is here. He's the chief of our Voice of America Burmese service, and he recently was in Myanmar. So let me go first to you, Htun. Ambassador Nikki Haley talks about the importance of freedom of the press, getting the media in there to report on these atrocities and what's going on there. Is there freedom of the press in Myanmar?
Yeah, first of all, thanks very much for having me here. I went to Burma just last month to explore the situation over there. But it is indeed, there's a problem. Is access to the ground and access to the information for the fair reporting is a problem. And then it's a kind of a siege mentality, not only of the government and then also the general population. For example, like we met Ministry of Information, Deputy Minister, and he bluntly put it like that kind of a foreign media organizations of having a kind of a sensationalized story and agenda setting is what he put it out. So they are a little bit of more than in that it's a little bit. They are very suspicious of the intentions and the work of the international media organization especially. And also, even also the local media also, they are not allowed to go into the ground to investigate or verify the news.
Jonah, you know, it's always in all these sort of civil wars, everyone's pointing the finger at everybody else. The Myanmar military and Aung San Suu Kyi are pointing back to August 25th when some rebels, Rohingya rebels, attacked some security posts and about 12 people were killed. And that started this round of going into all these villages and running these Rohingya, hundreds of thousands, actually about almost 1 million out of the area. But the Rohingyas will point back to then something that happened a year earlier, and then they'll point back to the fact that in 1982 there was a constitution passed in which they were made stateless in Myanmar, and thus so that they have been pushed out by the people of the military of Myanmar. Everyone's pointing a finger at everybody, but is there a solution?
You're absolutely right, Greta, that everybody is finger pointing, but let's be very clear. The responsibility does lie with the military of Myanmar. Yes, there was an attack in August of last year. However, we're talking about one rather small attack, a few even smaller, in the context of nearly 1 million people who have been cast out of their homes, attacked, as the Reuters report makes very clear. This massacre that the Reuters were so bravely reporting on is just one of many, many, many such massacres that have happened. The only thing that's different here is that reporters were able to document it. So there isn't really an equivalency between the two sides.
Aung San Suu Kyi, everyone thought that she would be the answer. She was under house arrest for a number of years, and then finally in about 2012 or so, she got into power, and the thinking was that she would change things. She's virtually almost silent on this. She is certainly not called ethnic cleansing, which which is being said at the UN. Is she powerless against the Myanmar military?
I think it's a two-part. First of all, she declared already very clearly that she is a politician now. So don't expect as a kind of a human rights icon as usual. So she is, in fact, politician. So she has to play that kind of a popular politics. Like in Burma, it's a majority Buddhist, and then there's a sentiment is very high on the minority Muslim and the Rohingya itself. So this is one part. Second thing is that in Burma, there's a two parallel government. Civilian government led by Aung San Suu Kyi, and another one is a very powerful military. So military is controlling the situation in the area very much. So unless Aung San Suu Kyi has a kind of control over that military, So there will be no solutions, and she cannot even guarantee the safety and then a kind of futures of those if there's returnees from the Bangladesh refugee camps.
Jonah, one of the solutions is to let the Rohingyas go back into Myanmar, this repatriation. But the problem is that even if they are let back into the area, they're still non-citizens or non-entities, and there's no guarantee they're going to get their property back. In some instances, they have to show that they even had the property, but all their documents have been burned and everything. Is there any sort of solution on the horizon that you can think of?
Oh, you're right, Greta. The only lasting solution is for them to return to their homes, because as Reverend Graham noted in your previous segment, if they stay in their refugee camps, they could be there for generations. We've seen this before elsewhere in the world. When we talk about the Rohingya, we have to bear in mind these are people whose ancestors have lived in Myanmar for longer than Myanmar has existed as an independent country. So it's not as if they are migrants who have come here, but in order to return to their homes, the government of Myanmar has to drastically change its approach, has to grant its citizenship, and has to guarantee them safety. Otherwise, they won't return, and if they were to, we just see even greater tragedy.
And Tom, we know that the safety is such a big issue. We had such great hopes when the U.S. lifted the sanctions in other countries in 2012 against Myanmar. We have 30 seconds left. Do you see Myanmar providing safety and guarantees to the Rohingya in the near future?
For the moment, no, because of that, Burma is still very much in a denial state, because they cannot deny the evidence that refugees are there, but they deny the root cause of the problem. So since they deny the root cause of the problem, even if there's a returnee, they go home, their safety is not guaranteed.
Meanwhile, 700,000 people penned with cholera, water problems, and everything else in that. Anyway, thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us. Jonah Blank from RAND and Lwin, who is from VOA's Burmese services. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
And earlier this week, we asked our social media audiences whether the U.S. is doing enough to help the Rohingya refugees. 73% said no. And some of the comments we received include this from @MaryWahlberg on Twitter. No, this is a dire situation for the Rohingya people. What is happening to them is horrific. This should not be happening in the 21st century. And this from Jim Bush on Facebook. Why is this our problem to solve? What is Thailand doing, or China, or India, or Australia, or Europe, or Russia? Why does one country on the complete opposite side of the hemisphere have to be on the hook to bail them out? And this from Vasily Zaitsev. About 10,000 Yemeni civilians have been slaughtered by America and Saudi Arabia. No story about this. We'll see you all next week. Thank you for joining us.